I'm Pamela Dolan. I am the rector, which is like the pastor here at St. Martin's, and I've been here for about 7 years. And of course, like many of you, the first time I walked into this building, first thing I did was look straight up and say, wow. I think it's even more wow now than it was then. I am here to very happily introduce our speaker today. Ariana Makau is the founder and principal conservator of Nzilani Glass Conservation, which is based in Oakland, my hometown. She holds an MA in stained glass conservation from the V&A Victoria and Albert, RCA, in London, England, and was second vice president and health and safety chair of the Stained Glass Association of America. Ariana is a current fellow of the American Institute for Conservation and a board member of the Western chapter of the Association of Preservation Technology. And this is really cool. I think we're going to hear more about how she got to do what she's doing in a minute when she starts the process, or the conversation, the presentation. But check this out. Nzilani's mission is be safe, have fun, do excellent work. I love that. It empowers collaborators by sharing processes, health and safety procedures, and the importance of preserving cultural landscapes and the environment. Ariana says her work is most fulfilling when it is at the intersection of equity, preservation, and art. And I can tell you from our perspective here at St. Martin's, it was a challenge to find a company that looked at this and said yes, instead of running away scared. And I think it was just an absolute godsend that we were able to connect with Nzilani and get to know Ariana and her crew. And I am delighted that she's here with us today. Please welcome Ariana Makau.
Thank you. I want to make sure the mic is working first. Can I get a thumbs up? Okay, great. Let's make sure we've got this up on the screen. Thank you for the introduction. People always come up and ask me, what's the favorite thing that you've ever worked on? And I can say in quite honesty, it's always the piece that the company is currently working on. And the reason I say that is because your piece is your favorite piece all the time. And it should be, right? We are collaborators, but this was a really fun piece for us to work on because it was so challenging, and I love challenges. So I want to take you on a little journey on how we came to work on this piece, and it'll be in 3 sections. The first part, you are correct. I'll give you a little bit more background on who I am and what Nzilani is. Then we'll talk about your piece. And then my favorite part of talks that I always give is at the end, not because I'm like, whew, I'm done, but because we get to interact, and I love questions. So from the very beginning, start thinking what your questions are, because I think when we engage and talk about things together, that's when it locks in, and this is your opportunity. And the other thing is, if I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know, but I'll probably tell you how you can know. And that was a lot of what happened when we were working on this piece. Next slide, please. So first of all, who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing? I started my company, Nzilani, and people always ask, well, why did you name it this name that a lot of people have a lot of trouble pronouncing? I named it after my grandmother. So my grandmother was Nzilani Makau. I'm also Nzilani Makau, and my name was given to me when next slide, please, when I received my master's from the Royal College of Art, but I did most of my work at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. In my father's culture, you're given one name when you're born and another name when you come into who you are. And he decided that when I said, yes, I'm gonna do stained glass conservation, preservation as my professional livelihood, that he would gift me with the name of his mother. And I thought a great way to honor her And that part of my background would be to name the company Nzilani. And as we already heard, our motto is be safe, have fun, do excellent work. Next slide. So first and foremost, we have to be safe. I think if you feel safe, then you feel comfortable having fun and doing excellent work. If you don't feel comfortable, those other two things are not going to happen. We deal with lead primarily and glass. You don't have any lead in your skylight, so that was nice. So everyone in our company goes through lead worker training, asbestos training. You don't have any asbestos either. 2 points for you. So when everyone's safe in that capacity, then we can do the next thing. Next slide, please. Have fun. And we really have fun on every project that we do. Hopefully I'm conveying that to you already. Every project we do is different and everything is really interesting. We work on small projects, glass objects, residential, singular windows to monumental pieces like your own. Next. And then do excellent work, because we feel if you are safe and you're having fun, the work is going to be excellent because you're in a good space. And I really feel that more people need to feel that way about whatever their profession is right now. I think it's really, really important that you go to work with happiness and joy and excitement and curiosity and not begrudgingly. So that's what I try to convey in running my company and the work that we do. Next slide. So before we dive in, what is dalle de verre? I said that your windows don't have lead and they don't have asbestos. Your baptismal window is more a traditional leaded art glass window, so pieces of glass held together with lead came. Your skylight, on the other hand, are big chunks of glass held together with a matrix of cement and sand and epoxy that were poured around the glass. So the chunks are cut and laid upright, and then this slurry of mixture is poured around them, and then it's solidified, and then it's set into, in your case, a metal frame. It tends to be bigger. It was really prolific in the early 1950s, 1960s, where artists were really trying to push the envelope with this new style. It's seen a lot in mid-century modern architecture. Remember the pushing the envelope when we move forward. Next slide. So when we got the call, I said, sure, seems doable. I'll come and look at it. I know what dalle de verre is. It's exciting. We don't get to work on them all the time. So the first phase was coming here, meeting with Janet and Pierre, who scrambled so fast up the roof that I was like, do you kind of want to work for Nzilani? Like a lot of people are like, you know. And he's like, yeah, just go up on this ladder. I'm like, oh, this is crazy. Okay, so we went up top and popped our heads down and looked at how the panels were put together. And I thought, oh, well, this makes sense. We'll take one piece out for investigation and discovery, and then from that we can extrapolate how we're going to conserve the whole piece. But we do need to see from underneath, because we need to see both sides. If you only look at one side, you're only getting 50% of the information. So we set up a schedule to put up a little bit of scaffolding to deal with your cross as well as a section. And we felt that that was pretty urgent, because in addition to looking at everything, I remember Janet coming to me and saying, here's a piece of glass that fell down from the roof. We don't want this to happen anymore. And I was like, that's a pretty big chunk of glass. Yeah, I don't want that to happen either. So the second phase was looking at those pieces again. So now we're going to go into a little bit more detail. Next slide. So here's the first phase where we looked from up top. I looked at the skylights. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of going up on your roof, some of them are operable and some of them are not. What we noticed, and Pierre conveyed from his numerous times up there before, it gets really hot in this cavity, and it was really dirty, just from the building expanding and contracting and kind of popping things off of the walls in there. And then the structure of the pieces seemed a little sketchy too. Next slide, please. So for us, more knowledge is always better. And we took those initial samples and sent them to Cal State East Bay to a scientist there who, like I said, we always like collaborating, right? So there is this teacher who teaches material science, and all of her students tend to think they're very myopic and think, well, I'm gonna get this degree and I'm gonna go work for tech. This is the only place I can apply my sciences. And she says, well, actually, there are other places you can go. So we sent our pieces there, and this was I'm always looking for cost savings as well for our clients. And she said if her students could do this assessment and we could wait a little bit longer, then she wouldn't charge because it's part of their learning. Next slide, please. So that's what we did. You can see the 2 chunks on the top, those also came out. And we were looking at the composite material, which is that grainy, kind of gray looking part, and then there was paper on it. And we think what that was the original design was done on paper, the glass was set on top of it, and then the cement was poured around it. And when they took it off and installed it, they just didn't care to take off all the paper because you wouldn't see it from underneath anyway. So then we got material analysis. And the reason we want to do this is the more we know what the materials are. You know, I was saying that everyone was really creative, and there were the 3 components, right? You have cement and sand and epoxy. It's not the same for every sting or every Dalle de Verre piece you look at. It's specific to what the artist was, and maybe they started with one and then they added a little bit more that it kind of looked funky, so they threw some more stuff in. So we really need to know what that was, because when you're doing conservation, you always want to use like for like materials. So this was really helpful to us. Next slide. We were also looking at this piece of glass that came out, and at the top right is showing you where it came out of the ceiling, and it was about this big. Next slide. So after that first part, we got the scaffolding up and we were looking from underneath, right? So the things we started to identify were where there were areas of loss, then also light leaks, and that literally is where light leaks through if there's separation between the glass and the cement, and then other old repairs. We know that there was a seismic retrofit and someone repaired it previously, and that actually caused more of the damage. And that was a challenge. So remember at the very beginning when I said, oh, we're just gonna come and take one out, and then from that we can extrapolate how to do the rest of the work. What we realized when we looked at both sides was in that seismic retrofit, people were looking at the metal structure and the pieces, and they noticed that the glass didn't expand and contract like the rest of the cement and epoxy holding everything together. So the epoxy was drying and kind of constricting, and that's why some of the pieces were loose. And so people thought, the past restorers thought, oh, well, we'll just add more material around to hold everything down so it doesn't fall out. But they did it all the way to the edge. So now all of the pieces are locked into the frame. So instead of having 80 panels independently sitting into this metal structure, we now have one big, this is your Dalle de Verre piece comprised of 80 panels as opposed to 80 independent panels. Next slide, please. So this was kind of an interesting approach, because normally we kind of dive in really early and start getting our hands in. And in this case, it was a lot of research and then we did work. So the next step in understanding how everything went together was to make this didactic to share with you folks how everything went together. And I won't go through all of these components. We're actually working on your final treatment report, which we'll deliver to you. You'll get it in a PDF and also books that you can have in your library so you can look through it. But all of these key components are how everything is put together. And one thing, next slide, I believe it is there. One thing that was really interesting to us was the fact when you had the seismic retrofit, there were more metal bars that strapped and kind of daisy chained those panels together to add extra protection. But the way they were attached was getting tap screws and screwing it right through that cement. So in order to take the panels out, like we first thought, we'd have to take those screws out, but we knew it would be detrimental and add more damage to taking those pieces out by doing that action. So that was kind of the key differentiator for us to say, whatever we're gonna do here, we need to do it in situ, in place. We can't take anything out. Next slide. Okay, this is a lot of interesting stuff, but it can get kind of dense. So I always like to throw some fun discoveries in there so everyone doesn't fall asleep. So one of the fun discoveries we found was this really thin material on the underside of the glass. And at first we thought, oh, well, someone, when they noticed the glass was failing, they just, maybe got a big paintbrush and put a whole bunch of clear epoxy on it. But it seems like it was the artists adding another layer of texture to the undersurface of the glass to make it reflect and refract the light even more so. It's on about 95% of the pieces. Some of it has peeled off, but you can really see the difference. And there's a photo coming up later where you can see the two different types. Next slide. This was these two things were really exciting. First, it's kind of very legacy-like. The hat was shoved into the cavity upstairs from previous workers. And I've seen this in other places. When we worked at Grace Cathedral, we found a newspaper dated from 1918, that was another job, 1932, into the cavity when we were redoing the windows. So it's pretty typical for workers, if we're working on something that they're attached to leave something. We didn't leave anything, I'm promising you. We're leaving you this, we're leaving you our reports. We didn't put anything up there. But then the other thing was a label, a manufacturing label from the company that made the stained glass. This piece of paper is this big. It is on the top cavity, and I take that back, it's not. It's on this side in that back corner, kind of by the sprinkler, on the purple glass, and when you're up there, unless you've got a flashlight on your head, you don't even see it. So it was really, really discreet, but it was such a fun discovery that when I found it, I brought the whole team over. I'm like, look what I found, it was amazing. And then I think when we came downstairs, I said, Janet, look what I found. So that was really fun. Okay, back to the school part. Okay, next. So when we started doing hands-on work, I always tell people when they first start working with us, I know you want to get in there and do something, but literally the first thing we do is document everything. Because for something of this scale, you really need to know where you are. So we set up a grid pattern of A, B, C, D, and then numbered it 1 through 20, and looked at every single panel and looked at every single crack, every single failure, to see what we needed to do and how we were going to approach it, and also how much material we were going to need to address everything. So this was day 1 of us doing everything, and I swear we didn't color coordinate with the skylight, it just happened. Next photo, or next slide, please. So here's an example of what we did. We did a lot of handwriting on site, and then we went back to the shop and translated it into something that you would understand. Next slide. This isn't even definitive of what we did. There's many more that are going to come in your report. But basically, we would take all of these and overlay them to give us information, because looking at it from underneath and then looking at it from up top would give you different information. And you could see like if one corner was more damaged than another. Next slide. The other thing we did was photograph it. Every single panel was photographed in transmitted light, reflected light, and then from up top. Next slide. And you can see the team here. We had scaffolding up so we could walk underneath. It was about 8 feet distance. And here are 2 of the team members. That's Casey on the left and Darren on the right, with their phones trying to get it parallel to get a photo of each one. So that was pretty easy from underneath, just leaning down and getting a good photo. Next slide. Upstairs, it was a little bit different. Here you can see, and this is sort of an explanation, if some of the photos from up top aren't a beautiful square, but they're kind of a parallax, this is how much distance we had. So the team, when they were working up, were on their stomachs or on their backs for a couple days. And we go back to have fun and doing excellent work. The first day the team came back, I didn't come up with them, and I said, oh, how did it go? And they're like, oh, that upstairs, there's not much room up there, but we just treated it like a yoga session. So they do it for like 5 minutes, taking photos and cleaning, and then someone would yell out namaste, and they would all come up and then go back to the next one. So if you approach things that way, it makes your day go a little faster. And they were tired, they were dirty, but they were happy. Next slide. At this point, we also realized we needed reinforcements. So I have 30 years of experience with stained glass conservation. Put any piece of stained glass from 1144, that was my first piece, to current, I'm fine. Dalle de Verre makes sense to me, but we don't have a wealth of experience. And so I know when to say, I need help. And I think that's so, so important. And I think it's not conveyed to many folks this day and age that everyone wants to be an expert from day one. And I think really being an expert is saying, I don't know, but I know where I can get help. And so we flew out. Laura, who just has a book coming out through the Getty Museum, specifically on Dalle de Verre. When we said, there's a couple things here that we'd love another pair of eyes on, she came out, literally flew out in the morning from New York, did an assessment, and flew back the same day. But it was really great to work with a colleague where, I knew the questions to ask, and she had good questions or good answers. And then together, we also did more research together. Next slide. So one of the things that she shared with us from her upcoming book is that in general, the ratio of glass to the cement around it is between 60 to 80%. And you all have one that pushed the envelope, because we're a little bit more than 80. And what that means is that you've got the weight of the glass being pulled by gravity and not much of that cement holding it all together. So there was a lot of her saying like, wow, this is interesting. I haven't seen anything like this before, which is good and bad, right? It's part of the things that are helping your glass stay together is when they poured that epoxy cement mix in there, the chips on the glass on the bottom side that are facing down were filled with that epoxy. And usually that's cleaned out after it's installed or before it's installed, but in this case it's not. So it's actually acting like little hands holding the glass up with the cement it has. And then the other thing is that the glass itself, it can be super chunky, but this was like the thinnest from a substantial type of Dalle de Verre that you had. So all of those things meant that as beautiful as this is, and you're getting so much light in, from day one, it was kind of struggling from a structural point. Next slide, please. And so as I was talking to her, the team was still doing these conditions, so you can sort of see how much information we had with these. Next slide. And these were some of the things we saw. So again, I was talking about separation of the glass from the epoxy substrate. Here, you've got a crack that is cracking through the repair. So whatever was happening before and it was repaired, it's happening again. And so that's obviously very concerning. And also some of the panels were bowing, so the whole thing was kind of going down. We also took the time to clean it as we were doing the assessment. So here's Armel on the top, and then labeled everything. So that's how we remembered what we were looking at. Next slide. I think this is another video, if you can. So after all of that, what we figured out is we can't take it out. We can put more material to seal all your light leaks and connect everything for now, but it's probably going to continue to move around a little bit. So how can we take care of this beautiful piece, make sure that all of you are safe sitting under it, and also think about the future? And one of the best nuggets that we got from Laura was, well, sometimes we've used netting. So we thought, okay, that sounds great, but how are we going to attach it? Because there's a sprinkler system up there. We want to make sure that you're safe with fire. And then also the sides don't have any metal on them because the drywall goes right up to that. So we kind of ruminated about it, and we thought, well, what about magnets? Magnets are another thing for conservation. We try to make things completely reversible, and magnets are reversible. And you can move them around, although I have to say with the magnets that we sourced, they don't move. Except when you're trying to pull them apart. And in fact, we had an instance where you get them as stacks of 10. We pulled them apart and put them on the bench, and they pulled themselves together. So pretty scary that they have that much heft. But what we did was we over-engineered, and I won't go through all the calculations, but basically figured out the size of each panel, how much weight it had, tripled that weight, and then used magnets that would compensate for that. And so on the left, we have the didactic of what one of our team members, Darren, gave to the net makers who were in New Jersey. New Jersey? They were East Coast. And they were really excited. So they've worked with conservation, architectural conservation before. They never worked with the skylight, so like, send us photos, tell us how it's going to be. So we gave them the didactic, and the different colors are the different ends. So the thicker ones in the middle, those have grommets on them, and then on the sides, it's a thinner border. So just calculating how everything was going to go together was a bit of a challenge. But we knew we did well when we sent this off to them, and they said, we don't even have to do a map. This is the most beautiful request we've ever had. And I said, well, have you ever worked with conservators before? This is what we do. We're all type A. We love it. So, and then I was really excited. We went through different, if you go to the next slide, I think I'm kind of doing this blind, so hopefully it's the photo I want. Here we are putting it in, and we found that they sent us lots of different samples. And we found, ironically, or maybe not, that black actually, your eyes, the human eye just doesn't see it. And then normally they're grommets, the circles that hold the anchoring points are silver. And they said, oh, we have black grommets. And I'm like, that's great. So they sent them out, and we got netting with silver grommets. And I said, there's hundreds of these. I don't have time to paint these. The church is having their holiday This is just not good. And so I think the turnaround time was less than 24 hours, right? That they sewed us a whole other section to get it out to us in time. And they were very apologetic. And I said, you know what, I tell my team, being professional doesn't mean that you're perfect. It's what you do after something that isn't perfect happens. I love working with you guys, this is great. And so they were happy, we were happy. We didn't have to paint hundreds and hundreds of grommets. And then there were just a few magnets that we used on the sides that did have to be painted. So on the day, we painted all of those magnets. But basically they're woven through and we twisted them on, and there's Loctite on the twist, so it's reversible, but you really have to crank it out. So those magnets are not going anywhere. The netting's not going anywhere. They cleared the fire safety, and I'm really, really happy with it. So hopefully you are too. Next slide. And this was the final photos I took before we left, knowing that the scaffolding was going to come down the next day. And it really, even up at this level, so this is, just a couple feet below, you really don't see the netting, you just see the beauty of the piece. Next slide. So what can you do now? I always say you should use preservation to protect and I have you and our future together. Next slide. Okay, this is all about you. I always say preservation, like I said, you are the keepers of this beautiful piece of art, which is also part of architecture. And the ways that you learn are to look. If you meet with me later, you'll see my jumpsuit has tons of little eyes on it. So if you look and listen, you've already done that, check off, right? You've heard me speaking, then you can learn. So you're learning here from me talking, but you can also learn from what this skylight is telling you, right? Like, keep eyes on it. Next slide. So the things that we're gonna learn now is I've recommended putting in data loggers, and what those are going to be, they check the relative humidity and also the temperature of what's happening in the building. Because one of the other things that Laura and I discussed with some of the members of the church was that part of the reason the skylight has been struggling is that you all keep yourselves comfortable underneath, and what's happening up above is a different temperature. And so those two temperatures are kind of fighting on this poor little skylight that's trying to hold it together. In the summer, its belly is like, I'm really cold, and its back is like, I'm burning, right? So if it's doing that a lot over time, and then maybe in the reverse in the winter time, that's not great for the material. So these data loggers will have one underneath here and one up top, and we can compare what's happening underneath and above just to track that. So that's passive preservation. Something that's more active is going back to those skylights, thinking about having ventilation going through those skylights. So we have had discussions with roofers who are gonna pop up. Most likely, we're still in the discussion phase, but the best idea so far is to pop up the height of some of those skylights so we can get ventilation coming through, but that's passive. But there's more on the sides of this top part of the roof, where I think we'll come in and remove part of the drywall that's up in the upper area to let air come through. So that's gonna go through all the way and keep the circulation going and make sure that the heat is lower than it was. Next slide. So this is the best part. Thank you for this part, and thank you for your questions that I really hope you're going to be asking in a minute. Thanks. So I guess just raise your hand.
And you said about the air going through. I just had a new roof put on, and that was part of the things what they were doing so that the air goes through. But how would you do that? It's so hot up there.
So we're trying to think about what is the best bang for your buck, if it were. And this is the least invasive that you can do with the current configurations of the church. So unlike what I said at the beginning, where we say, okay, we finished your window, goodbye, have fun. We are really excited to continue this conversation and work with you over time. So first we have to get the information and see if that's doing enough. And if not, maybe we'll put more holes on the side, right? We don't want to perforate the roof completely, but systematically working with the roofer, we'll put that in. Oh, follow it. Hold on, I think people need to hear you. Yeah.
Not to have it as cool inside, because that's a differential with, like in the summer. Are you?
No, well, first I'm suggesting everyone needs to take care of themselves first, right? I remember years ago when I was first going through school, there was this exercise that said, okay, there's an emergency in the museum, what do you do? And everyone said, grab the art. And the teacher said, take care of yourself, right? So you can take care of art in the future. So first of all, take care of yourselves. But yeah, maybe if you can even, raise the temperature a few degrees and the humans are happy underneath in the summer and lower it a little bit in the winter, that can help. But we don't know because we don't have the data yet. The data will tell us then what to do. But great question. I think thinking about it incrementally and not just doing a whole bunch of stuff first before you even have information is not the right way to approach it. Yeah.
Hi, Ariana. Beth Capel, I was the chair of the task force that worked on this, so we want to thank you for all your amazing work, and as well as Janet and Pierre and other people on the vestry for supporting us getting to this point. So first to comment, there are so many more colors than I ever knew. I was lucky enough to be here the day you came and looked up and said, oh, Dalle de Verre, and obviously knew what you were talking about. Did you know when you walked into this space that there were that many colors up there? Because I've sat here for years and had no idea.
I didn't, but I saw that there could be things. And then, the first time I was up on scaffolding, it was amazing that there was not only so much color, but within one color. I mean, the slideshow could have been 3 hours long, frankly, and I could have gone through every piece of glass, but like the purple glass that had that signature piece on it, it's not solid purple. It has swirls of lighter fuchsia with darker purple in it. And for our team, it was really great to be up close and see all those different types of choices that were made that lent to something that was so cohesive. Yeah, and it's really lovely and exciting for us to go and clean things and find, bring things back to life. And thank you for choosing Nzilani. We know you have a choice, and we're happy that you chose us. Yeah. There was a question over here.
How thick is the glass?
I'm trying to remember, and that's why I didn't say it before, but I think it's like 3/4 of an inch or something. It's not very thick. It should be, or in general, it's over an inch or more. So it's pretty thin for Dalle de Verre. And probably it was chosen to be that thin because it was a skylight as opposed to a wall. So I think initially there was some forethought as to if this is going to be sitting up there for a long time, we want to have it be as thick as possible to be Dalle de Verre, but thin as possible so it's not putting a whole bunch of weight on the ceiling. Oh, hold on one second. I just know people are watching and they need to hear.
I didn't quite understand what Laura Buckner advised about. What was she brought in to advise?
So Laura specifies, or specifically has her experience only in Dalle de Verre. So that's what she's been working on and researching. And I actually reached out to her a couple years ago when we were working on another project. And so just having another pair of eyes and someone who was looking at these pieces through her wealth and knowledge and history and experience working on Dal de Verre specifically moved the project forward. And she also had resources that we didn't know. We would have eventually found them, but she expedited it. And since we had a time frame, we knew that you needed to have this church ready and accessible before the end of the year. That was another thing. And just to let you all know, I like to be really transparent. Her costs were covered by Nzilani because I felt like it was an investment for us to work with another person.
When you keep talking about the deadline, for those who weren't here during this process, the deadline was Christmas. We really wanted to be back in the building for Christmas.
But you also had a performance before.
Yeah, we did.
that,
Like
too.
the weekend before, there was going to be a concert here with a group that really couldn't just find another place at that time of year. And yeah, so it was we were really, really grateful that worked out so well. And I thought, I mean, I got to meet Laura, not that I'm an expert in any way, but you guys just seemed like a great pair, like a great partnership, even though you didn't know each other until then, I don't think. And I think also, you know, the net turned out to be just a fantastic addition.
Yeah, I agree. This side hasn't asked any questions. I'm going to put you on the, yay.
That's okay. So actually, I don't know very much about the history of this, of our own window here. But is the artist still alive? And then are there other comparable pieces in the United States like this?
That's a great question. That's the first thing we looked for. Unfortunately or unfortunately, when working on stained glass, it lasts so long that oftentimes the studio doesn't exist anymore when we're working on their pieces, so we don't have them as a resource, and that was the case here. We did an initial search and that studio wasn't around, and we haven't come across anything. I don't know if, Pierre, if you did research.
No. All I know is the book that we have is the first 40 years of St. Martin's. It listed his name, and I Googled it, and that's all I found. And he's dead at this time.
Yeah, and you know, we asked Laura. We also, through our connections with the Stained Glass Association of America, asked them, and no one had heard of anything. But if something pops up, you know, you have us for life now, so we'll give you that information when and if we come across it.
I have a question, though.
Oh, yes.
Are there other pieces of de Verre glass that are as large as this, or are they still being done like this? Seems like it was a challenge, and is it enough of a challenge that it's
not done so much anymore? Yeah, so this is part of the information I learned from Laura, and you have this report too. So if I have the dates correctly, people started experimenting in the 1950s, really kind of got traction in the 60s, and then by the 70s, makers of the epoxy that was being used to make Dal de Verre specifically said on their pamphlets not to be used for Dal de Verre. So I think, you know, it's still being made. The other project that we worked on is for CCLA, which is, it's down in the South Bay. The name is escaping me. That's their acronym. I can get back to you on it. But it is a church that has Dal de Verre all around the sides of it, and it's the stages of life. And that company is the Loire Studios in France. And it was designed by Gabriel Loire. It was his final penultimate piece. He passed away a few years after it was completed, and his sons took over the studio. And we have many human and toolkits, but our studio head, Armelle Leroux, is from France. And so she reached out to the company in their shared language and said, we're working on this piece. Some of the substrate looks kind of funky and there's tide marks on it. Often there's salt that comes out of the water that was used. And she said, do you have any recommendations for conserving these pieces of yours? Because France is kind of far from California. And they said, oh, yeah, we restore those all the time. And she said, well, what do you use? And they said, oh, we just make them again. So that's their approach to conservation, restoration, is just replacing them. So it's another approach, but I think you see them more in walls, and I think they hold up a little bit better, but something that's this size with so much glass, you don't see that often. And the places specifically, I cannot recall them, but they're in the report. There's one that's a swirling ceiling piece that's based in Texas, but I can't remember exactly where it is. Any other questions? Oh, one more.
So going forward, how do we maintain the work that you and your crew did? Is this something that your company comes and checks on every once in a while, or?
Yes. So we gave a maintenance proposal to come and check every year, at least for the first couple years. The data loggers will be really helpful, and then we'll just come and, since we're so good at our yoga, we can come and clean periodically. And that's how we'll check on it. And that's why it's so important, that I said that this is such a documentation heavy approach. With all of those maps, we can go back and look at each specific piece and see, are there more cracks? And we have the photographs, so we can look at the photograph and look at the panel and see if there's a certain section that's failing faster or not, based on where the skylights are located and where the airflow is coming through. So that'll give us actual data as to what we're working on. But yeah, that's why I said you have us for life, because we're coming back.
Where did the name come from?
Say it again?
Where did the name of the process come from?
From dalle de verre.
Yeah.
It's French, and dalle, glass chunks or chunk, de is of, and then verre is glass, so chunks of glass. I
am just so amazed by the work that went into this. I especially want to reiterate that last point about the documentation, because that was one of our biggest challenges when we started trying to figure this out. And I think a big challenge for you as well is that we didn't have that much information from when it was installed, who did the work, who did the retrofitting work. So we're trying not to repeat that mistake, and that is thanks to you that we're going to have all of this that we will hold in, fireproof safes or something, so that it will be here for the foreseeable future. And I will just add as a final thought that even though I'm incredibly grateful that the deadline was met and we're back in the church and the results are so fantastic, it's a little bit sad to stop working with Nzilani. The crew was amazing. They were just so wonderful. And knowing that there were people with such expertise and such just like intellectual curiosity coming in here, and it felt like having, the A team, the best of the best, just really putting their all into this project. It was exciting. And I think all of us who were involved learned a lot. So I'm glad we have you forever. And it really, I can't express how grateful we are and what a fabulous result it is. And please thank her.
Thank you. You can also come visit us in Oakland, if you miss us.
Field trip. Okay, thank you all
Thank
for
you.
coming too.